Zoe Parker hated Mondays. She hated the coffee that always tasted a little too bitter, the endless cycle of emails she had to wade through, and the ever-present hum of fluorescent lights above her head. But more than that, she hated how no matter what she did, it felt like she was stuck on a never-ending loop of the same old grind. As a physicist at a tech startup in the heart of New York City, she was constantly on the verge of discovering something big, but every breakthrough she had seemed to fizzle out at the last moment. Sitting in her usual corner of the cafe across the street from her office, Zoe stared at the array of papers scattered in front of her, a scribbled mess of equations and diagrams. Her latest project, a deep dive into the theoretical mechanics of parallel universes, was one of her most ambitious ideas yet. The notion that multiple realities could coexist and even intersect had fascinated her since grad school. She was convinced that her research could be the key to unlocking a new understanding of the universe. But there was something gnawing at her. Something she couldn't quite put her finger on. "Okay, Zoe, focus," she muttered under her breath, tapping her pen against the paper. Her eyes flicked to the barista behind the counter, a young man with a crooked smile who always gave her a knowing look whenever she came in. Zoe took a deep breath, closed her eyes, and ran through her calculations once more. Parallel universes were not just an abstract theory, she knew. They were real. Somewhere, in some version of reality, another Zoe Parker was sipping a different cup of coffee, or maybe sitting in a different cafe in a different city. She had to prove that. This was the key to everything. That a sharp jolt suddenly shot through her body. Zoe's head snapped up. Her surroundings began to shimmer, and for a brief second, everything around her, the tables, the chairs, the coffee cups, looked distorted. A high-pitched ringing filled her ears, and the world seemed to ripple like the surface of water disturbed by a stone. Her heart raced, she blinked hard, trying to shake off the dizziness, but when her eyes opened again, everything had changed. The cafe was gone. The tables, the people, everything. Zoe was standing in the middle of an endless, dark void. Her surroundings were flat, featureless, and infinite. The only thing she could see was the faint flicker of shapes in the distance, like shadows trying to form themselves into something real. "What the hell?" Zoe whispered, her voice shaking. In the far distance, a figure began to emerge. It was tall, with angular features and a strange, glowing aura. Zoe's first instinct was to run, but she didn't know where to go. The figure was coming toward her with deliberate, slow steps. "Zoe Parker," the voice called out, and it felt like it came from everywhere at once. It was deep and resonant, yet somehow distant, as if echoing through a vast chasm. Zoe's heart raced. "Who are you?" she demanded, her voice louder than she intended. The figure stopped in front of her, and the aura flickered around it. "I am Kai," it said simply. "Welcome to the edge of dimensions." "Edge of what?" Zoe scoffed, rubbing her eyes as though to wake herself up from some bizarre dream. "This has to be some kind of hallucination. What is this place? And where is everyone?" "Not a hallucination," Kai replied, his voice calm, almost amused. "This is the edge of dimensions. The convergence point of all parallel worlds. Where realities meet, clash, and sometimes, fade." Zoe's confusion deepened. "You mean like, alternate realities? You're telling me I'm in some kind of crossover zone? Is this some sort of joke?" Kai nodded, and the faint light surrounding him grew brighter. "No joke. This is where all dimensions intersect. All the universes you've theorized about, each one exists, but only here can they meet." Zoe's breath caught in her throat as she tried to process what he was saying. "Are you saying that this place is real? And that there are other versions of me? In other dimensions?" Kai smiled, a flash of something like sympathy flickering across his face. "Yes. All versions of you exist, as they do for everyone. You are merely one thread in the vast tapestry of possibility. But be warned, Zoe. The more you draw from the energies of these dimensions, the more you risk losing yourself. The cost is high. Zoe felt a strange weight settle in her chest. The cost of what? She asked, her voice suddenly quiet. Dimensional energy, Kai explained. Every time you interact with this space, every time you draw power from another universe, you take a piece of it with you. But that power comes at a price. If you take too much, your physical form will begin to dissipate. Your body will fade into the very fabric of this place. Until you cease to exist. Zoe's mind spun. This was impossible. Everything she knew about physics, about the laws of the universe, this couldn't be real. Yet, here she was. Standing in a void between realities. What am I supposed to do? Zoe asked, her voice barely above a whisper. You have two choices, Kai said, his voice carrying an odd mix of empathy and cold detachment. You can leave this place, return to your reality, and forget all of this. Or, you can stay and learn to harness the energy of the edge. But remember, power has its price. Zoe's heart thudded in her chest. For a brief moment, she considered running. Returning to the cafe, back to her research, her mundane life. But the temptation of this power, the possibility of understanding the very fabric of the universe, was too much to resist. She squared her shoulders. What do I need to do? Kai nodded approvingly. You'll need to learn how to tap into the energy of these intersecting worlds. It's not easy. But you are more capable than you know. Zoe followed Kai as he led her deeper into the void. The ground beneath her feet was as solid as it was intangible, like walking on the surface of a dream. The air around her buzzed with an almost electric charge. It was intoxicating. Every dimension is different, Kai explained as they moved. Each one has its own rules, its own energy signature. Some are more stable than others. Some are full of potential. Some are dangerous. Zoe nodded, but her mind was racing. Could this really be happening? She had so many questions. So much to understand. But the most pressing one, the one that gnawed at her, was the cost. How much could she take from these dimensions without losing herself? How do I draw energy from these worlds? Zoe asked. Kai glanced at her, his expression unreadable. You'll know when the time is right. But be careful. The energy is not infinite. And it doesn't come without consequences. Zoe took a deep breath, steeling herself. She wasn't sure what she was getting into, but the pull of the unknown was irresistible. As she moved forward into the shifting, fractured landscape, she couldn't help but feel like this was just the beginning of something much bigger than herself. Something that could change everything. Zoe's feet seemed to glide over the shifting ground, each step a strange mixture of physical solidity and the eerie feeling of walking through something intangible. The space around her hummed, almost like the gentle buzz of static electricity, and she couldn't help but wonder if her body was already beginning to change in ways she couldn't comprehend. The pull of the unknown, the allure of untapped potential, was almost overwhelming, and she felt herself leaning forward, desperate to know more. Kai's presence beside her was constant, though his movements were measured, deliberate. He didn't seem to hurry, even in this place where time felt fluid, fractured, like a million different clocks ticking in a million different realities. The silence between them was comfortable, almost companionable, as if this journey into the heart of dimensional energy was something they had both experienced 1,000 times before. At last, they came to a stop. Zoe didn't realize they had been walking for so long. The landscape around them had shifted again, but now there was something different. In the distance, a soft glow flickered, first faintly, then more brightly. It seemed to pulse with life, radiating outwards like the heartbeat of a world, a thrum of energy that filled the space with a tangible force. Zoe's pulse quickened. That's the core, Kai said, his voice low. It's where all the energy converges. The source of everything you'll need. Zoe's breath caught in her throat. The core? Her mind raced with possibilities. All the questions she'd had, the scientific hypotheses, the theories she'd written in countless notebooks, all of it had led to this point. This was the epicenter of everything she had ever wanted to understand. "It's alive?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Kai nodded. "In a way. The core is the foundation of this place. It draws power from all the realities that intersect here. But it's unstable. Unpredictable. Be careful." Zoe took a deep breath, trying to steady her nerves. "And how do I access the energy?" Kai looked at her with an unreadable expression, his eyes dark. "You'll know when you're ready. But remember, you're not the only one who can draw from it. There are others here, beings who have lived too long in this space. Some want to protect the core, others want to control it. The energy is tempting, Zoe. But it is not without its price." Zoe didn't answer. She couldn't. The words seemed hollow, like a warning she was only half willing to heed. All she could focus on was the core, pulsing in front of her like the beating heart of a forgotten god. Her hand trembled at her side, and for a fleeting moment, she thought she might reach out toward it without thinking. She could already feel the pull of the energy, its weight and its promise of power, but then she remembered Kai's warning. "The price, stay close," he said, as if reading her thoughts. "The closer you get, the more unstable it becomes. There's no turning back once you make contact." Zoe nodded, swallowing her fear. She had come this far, hadn't she? The allure of discovery was too much to resist. They moved toward the core, and as they did, Zoe's mind spun with possibilities. She could change everything. She could bend reality itself to her will. What was the cost of such power, after all? If it could unlock the secrets of existence? They stopped just short of the glowing orb, its light now radiating out in waves, making the air shimmer like heat over a summer sidewalk. Zoe could feel the energy swirling in the space around them, a tangible force pressing against her skin. "It was intoxicating." "This is it," Kai said. His voice was softer now, more contemplative. "You're standing at the crossroads of infinity, Zoe. The energy here can give you anything you want. But you have to decide if you're ready to pay the price." Zoe took a deep breath and stepped closer, drawn by the pull of the core. The air crackled as her fingers reached out toward it, the static buzzing louder in her ears. And then, without another thought, she made contact. The moment her fingers touched the core, the world around her exploded. It wasn't a physical explosion. There were no flames or debris. Instead, Zoe was overwhelmed by a flood of sensations, too many to process, too fast to understand. The energy of countless realities surged through her, rushing into her mind, her body, her very being. It was like drowning in light, a blinding brilliance that filled every corner of her existence. She saw visions of other versions of herself, living in different worlds. In one, she was a celebrated scientist, presenting her groundbreaking theories on parallel universes. In another, she was a rogue agent, navigating a dystopian future. In yet another, she was nothing. A shadow, fading into nothingness. Her heart raced, and her mind reeled as the energy poured into her. Her body buzzed with the force of it. The flood was intoxicating. She felt sharper, more alive than she had ever felt before. Ideas and thoughts she couldn't even comprehend rushed through her mind, faster than she could process them, and then, just as quickly, it stopped. Zoe gasped for breath, blinking rapidly as she tried to make sense of the overwhelming flood of information. She looked around, disoriented, and realized she was still standing next to the core, her hand still resting against it. But something had changed. The world around her flickered like a broken television signal, the edges of reality warping and distorting. Zoe felt it then, her body was changing. It wasn't a dramatic shift, but it was there. Her skin tingled, her bones felt lighter, like she was losing substance. The world around her felt more and more distant, as though she was slowly fading away, slipping between the cracks of reality itself. What's happening to me?" Zoe whispered, her voice trembling. Kai stepped forward, his expression unreadable. I warned you, he said softly. You've taken too much. You're already starting to fade. Zoe stumbled back, her vision blurring. The core pulsed with energy, but it no longer felt like a gift. It felt like a curse, a weight she wasn't prepared to bear. She could feel herself slipping, pieces of her, memories, her very essence, vanishing into the void. No, she gasped, shaking her head. This can't be real. I need to control it. I can control it. Kai looked at her with something like pity. You can't control it, Zoe. The energy doesn't work that way. It consumes. It takes. Zoe's panic was rising. The world around her was growing dimmer, fading. She tried to pull her hand away from the core, but it wouldn't budge. The force of the energy held her in place, and she could feel it, her body, her very self, dissolving. No, she said again, louder this time. I won't disappear. I can't. But no matter how hard she fought, the pull of the core was too strong. It was like the very fabric of existence was unraveling around her. And Zoe realized, with a horrifying clarity, that she had made a terrible mistake. Zoe's mind raced as she felt herself being pulled into the core's relentless grip. It was as though her very being was splintering into pieces, each part of her pulled into the vast, swirling vortex of energy that now threatened to erase her existence. She could feel herself disintegrating, her thoughts becoming fragmented, memories of her life slipping away like water through her fingers. She gasped, but no air came. No breath. She wasn't even sure if she could still feel her lungs. Stop it, she screamed, her voice barely audible, drowned out by the pounding in her ears. But the core didn't care. It was devouring her. Her thoughts, her identity, began to blur, and Zoe was certain she was going to vanish completely. A wave of cold dread washed over her, mingling with a surge of anger. She had come so far, risked so much to uncover the truth about the multiverse. To learn what no one else had. She couldn't let this be the end. She refused. Somewhere, in the distant recesses of her mind, she remembered Kai's words, the more you use it, the more it consumes you. And you're not the only one who can draw from it. With an effort that felt like she was tearing herself apart, Zoe pushed against the energy, summoning every ounce of willpower she had left. She concentrated, trying to anchor herself, trying to recall the grounding force that had brought her here in the first place, her love for discovery, the thrill of knowing that the answers to everything lay just out of reach. The core's pull weakened, and she found herself able to think again, the crushing force of the energy subsiding just enough for her to regain control over her body. But it wasn't enough. Not nearly. She tried to pull her hand away from the core, but it was as though it were welded to her skin. The force was too strong. The more she struggled, the more she could feel herself slipping away. The edges of her vision were fading, the colors bleeding into nothingness. Her hands began to flicker, transparent, like she wasn't even really there anymore. Desperation surged through her. She couldn't go out like this. Not like some cautionary tale of hubris. She refused to let it be the end. She screamed, a choked cry slipping from her throat. Help me. But Kai was silent. Zoe's heart thudded in her chest. Was he just standing there, watching her dissolve? Was he a bystander in her demise? She tried again, with what little energy she had left. Her thoughts scrambled, searching for a way out. Then, a memory hit her, not her own. A fractured vision of an alternate Zoe, a Zoe from a different dimension, who had faced similar consequences. This version of herself had not faded away. Instead, she had embraced the imbalance, letting herself fragment, not resisting the process. She had split into countless shards of herself, allowing her essence to scatter into multiple realities. Zoe's mind seized on the idea. Could it work? Could she do the same thing? Could she shatter herself into pieces, scattering her essence across the multiverse, and survive? There was no time for doubt. With the last remnants of her strength, she focused on the energy, willing herself to split. To multiply. She imagined herself as countless versions, all existing at once, all pulling from different dimensions, never relying on just one source of power. For a moment, nothing happened. She couldn't tell if the core had swallowed her whole or if she was still standing there, fighting to breathe. But then, there was a shift. Her body seemed to fade completely from existence for a split second, like a blink that stretched on forever. Then, she was there again. Whole. She could feel the ground beneath her, solid, unyielding, but she wasn't alone anymore. Zoe looked around in stunned disbelief. The space was different. The energy had changed. Instead of the overwhelming, singular force of the core, there were now ripples in the air, dimensional echoes, like faint ghosts of alternate versions of herself. They flickered around her, each one a reflection of the person she could have been, each version pulling from a different reality. Zoe was no longer just one. She was many. But even in this strange, new state, she felt the weight of the core still pressing against her, trying to bring her back into the singularity it had once threatened to destroy her with. She was stretched thin, pulled in 1,000 directions. The energy was coursing through her, but now, it was no longer about control. It was about survival. About existing. Kai stepped forward, his face unreadable, but there was a faint trace of something like admiration, or perhaps a hint of regret, in his eyes. "You've done it," he said quietly. "You've fragmented yourself, split your essence. But don't think for a second that this makes you invincible." Zoe's many versions flickered, some speaking without her intent, others moving in different directions of their own accord. She wasn't entirely in control of them, but they felt like an extension of herself, like facets of a diamond she had never known existed. "I don't know if I can handle this," one of her voices whispered, the body standing apart from the others. Her gaze was distant, looking into a space that Zoe couldn't see. "How do you live with 1,000 versions of yourself?" "You don't," Kai said. "You become a ripple. A wave in the multiverse. A fragment. But a fragment that exists across infinite realities. You are both nothing and everything." Zoe, now more than one but still herself in all these versions, felt a surge of uncertainty. She had fragmented, yes, but was this really survival? Or had she just traded one form of death for another, but she couldn't go back? Not now. The power she had drawn from the core had changed her beyond recognition. She wasn't sure if she wanted to return to her original self, to the life she had left behind in New York, with its dull office job and stale coffee. "You'll need to learn how to navigate this," Kai continued. "You'll need to find balance. You're no longer just a person. You're a multitude. And every dimension you touch will have consequences. Too much power, and you'll become like the others, the ones who've lost themselves completely. They've faded, scattered like dust in the wind, never to be whole again." Zoe's heart clenched. She couldn't become like them. She wouldn't. She had to find a way to exist in this new form. To control the power she had taken, before it took everything from her. "Then help me," Zoe said, her voice firm, though it sounded like it came from a dozen places at once. "Teach me how to balance this. Teach me how to control it." Kai studied her for a long moment. His eyes were filled with something else now, perhaps not pity, but a kind of wariness, the understanding of someone who had seen too many others fail. "It's not something you can just learn, Zoe. This place, this power, it changes you. There's no going back to who you were. You'll have to make peace with that." Zoe stood still, surrounded by her fractured selves. The energy buzzed in the air, filling her with 1,000 possibilities, 1,000 directions she could take. There was no way to unchoose this. No way to reverse the process. But she had learned something crucial in those final moments before she split. The price of power was not just fading from existence, it was losing yourself, but she had done the opposite. She had found herself in 1,000 different forms, and perhaps, in that vast ocean of selves, there was a way to navigate the chaos. A way to find balance without losing everything. She had made her choice. She would survive, whatever the cost.